Hi, I'm Alfie Morse. I'm a news editor at UK Property Forums. Today we're at OxProp Summit, and Matthew and I have been interviewing loads of our guests about what they thought about the speeches today, any other topics they'd perhaps be interested in speaking about, and we think it's been really interesting. So today's podcast is a compilation of those talks, and we hope you enjoy.
Harrison Simons, Proctor Matthews Architects.
Excellent. You maybe an architect or town or planner or master planner?
So specialise in neighbourhood design.
And first time at OxProp?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Really?
First time here.
You enjoying it?
Yeah, very good. Yeah, it's a lovely space, beautiful building.
Right.
Nice
Great organisation.
Very good organisation.
Absolutely. You said exactly the right thing. That makes my life so much easier. Great. Well, anyway, look, Harrison. We're just about to start another session, and we're doing it with a team from Dorchester Living, and also with Sladen Estates and Bicester Arc, looking at housing and trying to sort of talk about how housing in Oxfordshire needs to have perhaps more of a broader solution. So how are you approaching design trends and the priorities you're seeing to become more important in new developments?
I think there's a really interesting moment that we're going through here where viability is becoming so challenging, and in order to get the right mix of housing we really need to try and push densities, but we're finding that apartments are very difficult to deliver, so we're looking more at stacked maisonettes in order to get the kind of density.
And when you say apartments, just define that slightly.
So flatted developments that rely on communal corridors and circulation in order to get to them. So the good thing with stacked maisonettes is that you can completely reduce all of that circulation area and people have their own front doors. So there's a real kind of community incentive in terms of placemaking, but you're also getting the density at the same time.
What are developers and communities asking for more from architects today?
I think there's a lot of things that are being asked of architects, from building standards, sustainability standards, all sorts of different requirements that's putting lots of pressure on viability. So the real thing that we need to try and prioritise at the moment is thinking about the sort of design initiatives that are more kind of fundamental to make a thriving neighbourhood. So thinking about the things that make walkable, mixed uses, dense neighbourhoods in order to allow people to live their most sustainable lives.
So we heard a lot this morning about placemaking.
Yeah. How
important is placemaking to your scheme? And when I say your scheme, do you just want to say what the scheme is?
So Hayford Park near Bicester, effectively in Oxfordshire, so it's old US Air Force Base, and we bought it it'll be 17 years ago this summer, so a long time ago now. But placemaking is absolutely paramount to what we're delivering at Hayford. And I think I went into that purchase as a kind of planning background, house building background, very focused on architecture of individual houses. And over the next 16, 17 years, really, the placemaking is what's made it and made it more desirable. And it's what we've really reinvested in and I probably spent 80% of my time thinking about the places and the structures and the communities and how they're going to use them, rather than where the windows are and how those rooms work, which is still important, but it's not the focus.
And we've heard from a colleague of yours about different types of spaces and the need for different types of spaces. Is that something you're pursuing at Hayford Park?
The scale is important. I mean, what we're trying to do is to deliver as much housing as quickly as possible, and what that means is you need a breadth of housing. So it's no good just doing detached family houses for 3 and 4 beds, or there is a market for that, and the traditional house builders cater for that market very well. But if you really want to be delivering many more units, you need to think about a mix of tenures. So it could be rental or it could be ownership models, and affordable. And you also need to think about the different age brackets you're designing for. We think a lot more about kind of empty nester, which may be more appropriate for the apartment type living. And rental apartments, but people, when they're buying houses, tend to want a traditional house with a garden, and there is a desire when people are making purchases to think about those things. They're going to be there for, particularly with stamp duty, they're going to be there for a number of years. This is not a decision for today and I'll change it tomorrow.
So I'm Hannah McCarthy, I work for Octopus Energy in the New Homes team.
Energy, wow, that is such a huge subject. I'm not quite sure where I start, but let's just start on new developments, looking at Hayford Park and other schemes, to a certain extent like Bicester Arc and others, where energy is so important. Where did Octopus fit in this discussion?
Octopus Energy wasn't even in existence when Hayford Park started, so we are late to the party, as it were. But what we do is we work with housing developers to work out the right combination of heat pump, solar, battery, in order to give the best tariff to that customer. And Zero Bills is our leading world-first proposition. That means a customer living in a new home property that we have accredited has a zero energy bill for at least a decade for their home.
And in terms of the actual relationship with the customer at somewhere like Hayford Park, how does that work? Because it's presumably you're looking at a different offer, I suppose, aren't you? In reality, aren't you?
So Zero Bills is just a tariff, so customers sign up for it. Yeah, so they don't have to go with us by any means. They can go with another energy provider, but they will get a bill with them.
In terms of sort of looking at the role of renewables and smart energy systems, what about in the future? How do you see that evolving?
Yeah, so we've just had the launch of the Future Home Standard, which is a fantastic milestone for new houses and for decarbonising the new home housing stock of the UK. So heat pump, solar are now going to be mandated, which is fantastic. I guess having batteries mandated could be in the future, looking at things like vehicle to grid and how we can optimise electric vehicles and combine them in a home ecosystem as well. So there's so much more development that we can explore. Microgrids for community infrastructure. It's a very exciting next few years we've got ahead.
Okay, Richard Wade, good to have you at OxProp Summit today. Just wanted to ask you about how have you found today so far? We're at about the halfway point. How have you enjoyed our sessions?
Really good, very engaging. There's obviously a lot of discussion at the moment around big topics like devolution, the local government reorganisation. I thought the first session involving the city and county councils was particularly eye-opening.
I think I agree, yeah. Bit of a back and forth, very good. On housing development, obviously a big issue. What do you think are the key influences on that right now?
Well, we're all waiting to see what's going to happen in terms of the decision-making around the unitaries, because whatever decision is made is obviously going to make quite a key impact on the strategy around housing policy, and there was quite a bit of discussion this morning about the Growth Commission plan. So we're in a bit of a holding pattern, but as ever with Oxford, it's not just housing, it's infrastructure, transport, a lot of discussion in the hall, and outside about transport and the challenges Oxford obviously has, and what's the future going to look like? Yeah.
From your perspective, what are the biggest issues for you, would you say?
So my particular focus is construction, and how that links into planning and what's going to happen. I suppose on the planning side, and what's going to happen with the Oxford local plan, again, depending upon whichever decision is made and whether we're going for the 3 unitaries, 2 or 1. For me, one of the key challenges is always going to be how joined up is the thinking. I think you see quite a contrast between what might happen in the 3 unitaries option and the single unitary. Everybody has a view on that, and it's provoking some quite passionate debate. My personal view, for what it's worth, is that I think there is a risk we could lose that joined up approach if we don't go for the single unitary option, which then brings potentially in broader issues, nationally important infrastructure projects, things like the Western Rail Link, East West Rail, and what that means for the East West Corridor in Oxford Cambridge. So I think these are all really, really interesting questions, which we may see a bit of shape developing over the next 18 months.
So I think that unitary view you talk about, do you think that's something that could benefit both residents and companies? Which I think is something we've seen a lot of talk about, is benefiting not just the companies that bring development into the area, but the local residents who have a huge interest in the area.
I'd love to have a crystal ball and to be able to say, yes, it will. I think the potential risk, if we're going for the 3 unitary option, is you'll get tension built in to the competing interests of city, county, wider region. what I do like the idea of, again, this just a personal point of view, is if you have a single unitary, but then you get the development corporation getting off the drawing board, happening in Oxford, and again this morning some discussion about what's happening in Cambridge, but it looks as though that might go ahead. But then you've got hopefully a dovetailing between what would be good for the city. I mean, Oxford City is obviously massively important, and there's a strategic focus there. But you just wonder if a bit of the sort of broader picture might be lost if so much attention goes into city without really looking at those broader issues, again, particularly coming down to transport, but then the impact on housing and what's really the big strategic plan, making sure people are able to live in places that work well for that balance of home life, working life, and just the ability to move around. But we also heard this morning about the Ellison Institute, which is such an interesting project, and what that could mean, and how that might be a sort of a beacon of good development, or something that helps to build another hub around Oxford. Some very interesting questions were being posed there about what part is that going to play in the broader community. So again, it's going to be fascinating to see how that plays out.
Now, you just said about interesting questions. Obviously, OxProp Summit is where interesting questions come out. Now, we've heard that last night you actually got into an interesting conversation. Could you maybe enlighten us more about that? I was at the OxProp Summit dinner at Trinity last night, and which was a great event. Really good opportunity to come together and have some nice informal discussions. But the formal part of it was Philip Waddy's talk, where he was talking about the role of the professional and architects in particular, and the role they have to play and what the future looks like. But a particular question came up about insurance, and Philip was asking a question which certainly resonates with me about how risk is dealt with generally, because the professionals are at the sharp end of where issues of risk come up, and yes, I hold my hand up, that sometimes comes down to the sorts of things that lawyers look at. But he asked why there are not more employers and clients who are potentially looking at single project insurance as a means to deal with how risk is treated on a project. There have been some good examples of where single project insurance does appear to have worked, to have produced a much more cost-effective model looking at whole life risk and project risk and putting it all under one roof. And he didn't, in so many words, lay down a challenge, but it sounded like a challenge as to whether Oxford has a role to play in that, and whether there are clients who might dip their toe in the water and look at that as being something which could apply to their projects. We know there's some fantastic projects around Oxford. So the question is, are there any clients out there who are going to be prepared to do that? I think that would be a really good thing to see. Yeah, that was all of our clips for the podcast today. We hope you enjoyed. We hope we'll see you next year at our next OxProp Summit, and we hope that you'll keep following the podcast.